My husband called me from the hospital after a car accident. I rushed there and found a woman already in his room who thought she was his girlfriend. I've rewritten the opening of this post 6 times. Every version starts differently, some clinical, some angry, one that began with a joke that I deleted because nothing about this is funny. Even though sometimes at 3 a.m. when I can't sleep I find myself laughing at the sheer absurdity of how it all came apart, which I think is either a coping mechanism or early onset unraveling, and I haven't decided which. The version you're reading is the one where I just start at the beginning and go straight through to the end, because I've learned in the months since that this story doesn't benefit from a careful presentation. It benefits from being told plainly, in order, the way things actually happened. So, the beginning. My name is irrelevant. I'm 31 years old. I've lived in the same mid-sized southern city my entire life, except for 4 years of college 3 states away, after which I came back because my family was here, and I liked the pace of it, and I'd never been someone who needed to prove something by living somewhere harder. I work in hospital administration. I know, the hospital detail is going to become relevant in a way that carries its own particular irony, and I see you noticing that. And I've worked for the same healthcare network for 6 years, which means I know how hospitals work, how they're laid out, which nurses are the good ones, where the decent coffee is, and what the parking situation is like at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I know the parking situation at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night because that's when my husband called me. His name he's alive. He didn't die, though I've had complicated feelings about that fact at various points in the story, which I'll get to. His name is Ryan. We met at a friend's birthday party when I was 24, got married when I was 27, and had been together for 7 years total by the time any of this happened. 7 years is a long time. Long enough to know someone's coffee order and their irrational fears and the specific face they make when they're pretending to be fine but aren't. Long enough to think you know someone completely, which is of course the setup for the kind of story I'm about to tell you. Ryan is an architect. Not the glamorous kind, not swooping museums and landmark buildings, but the kind that designs mid-range commercial spaces and the occasional upscale home renovation, which pays well and suits his particular combination of creativity and practicality. He is tall and good-looking in a quiet way, the kind of handsome that creeps up on you rather than announcing itself. He coaches youth soccer on weekends, which I realize now was an excellent piece of character costuming. Nothing reads, trustworthy family man, quite like voluntarily spending Saturday mornings with 12-year-olds and orange wedges. He likes documentaries about places he's never been and cooks elaborate weekend breakfasts and has a habit of reading the last page of a book before he starts it, which drove me insane for 7 years and which I now cannot think about without feeling a complicated grief that I don't have the right vocabulary for yet. I loved him. I want to say that clearly and without embarrassment, because I think there's a tendency in these posts to perform retroactive indifference, to rewrite the past in a way that makes the narrator seem less foolish for having loved someone who turned out to be worth less than advertised. I'm not going to do that. I loved Ryan. Genuinely, consistently, in the daily unglamorous way that long relationships require. I was happy. Or I thought I was happy. Or I was happy and he wasn't, which is its own kind of loneliness that I don't think I'll fully understand from the inside. The problems, the signs, the moments I've since pressed under a microscope and examined from every angle didn't announce themselves. They never do, I think. The people who write these posts all say the same thing. You don't see a wall until you've already walked into it. What you see, in retrospect, is a series of moments that individually meant nothing and collectively meant everything, and the difference between noticing and not noticing is almost entirely a matter of whether you were looking. I wasn't looking. I was busy being married, which it turns out is a very effective cover for not looking. Ryan had started traveling more for work in the 18 months before the accident. More site visits, he said, more client meetings in other parts of the state, the occasional overnight when the drive back wasn't practical. This was plausible. His workload had genuinely increased. I knew that. I'd watched him take on more projects and work later, and spend weekends at his drafting table in a way that had felt like ambition, and now makes me question my own perceptions. He'd always been a homebody, so the travel had been a shift, but a shift with a reason attached to it, and I'd accepted the reason without pulling at the edges of it. He was slightly more private about his phone than he used to be. Nothing dramatic, not the frantic screen hiding, not the leaving the room to take calls that you read about in these posts. Just slightly more likely to have it in his pocket than on the table, slightly less likely to leave it charging in the kitchen overnight. I noticed. I filed it. I did not act on it because what was I going to do? Accuse my husband of hiding his phone when my evidence was that he'd started keeping it in his pocket like a normal adult person? There was a weekend in April, about 4 months before the accident, when Ryan went to what he said was a work thing, a firm retreat, 2 nights, partners, and senior staff. I remember because it coincided with my college roommate visiting, and I'd been glad to have the apartment to myself for the visit. Melissa and I had a great weekend. Ryan came back Sunday evening with a slightly sunburned nose and a gift from what he said was a resort shop in the mountains, one of those candles with a pretentious name like Forest and Rain, and I'd put it on the bathroom shelf and burned it for weeks and thought nothing of it. That candle is still in the bathroom. I haven't burned it since August. I'm not sure why I haven't thrown it out yet. Probably for the same reason I still have his coffee mug in the cabinet, some combination of not wanting to be melodramatic and not being ready to have the drawer all the way through. The night of the accident was a Tuesday in late August. Ryan had told me he was meeting a client for dinner, a developer he'd been working with on a commercial project, someone he'd mentioned a few times in the context of work. He'd left around 6:30, kissed me on the cheek on his way out, said he'd probably be back by 9 or 10. I'd made myself dinner, watched something I'd been saving for when he wasn't home because he'd never sit through it, and was getting ready for bed when my phone rang at 11:12. The number wasn't Ryan's. It was an unfamiliar local number, and I almost didn't pick up because who calls from an unknown local number at 11 at night? But something made me answer. Instinct, or the hour, or the small irrational hum that lives in the back of your skull when you're a person who loves someone and knows that the world is capable of sudden cruelty. "Is this Natalie?" said the voice on the other end. A woman's voice, calm and professional. "Yes," I said. "My name is Sandra. I'm a nurse at St. Augustine Medical Center. I'm calling about your husband, Ryan Calloway. He's been in a car accident. He's stable. I want to say that first. He's stable and conscious, but he's been brought in, and he's asking for you. Are you able to come in?" I was in my car in 4 minutes. St. Augustine is 12 minutes from our house on a normal day. I made it in 8, which tells you something about my state of mind and also about the lack of traffic at 11:15 on a Tuesday night. I know the hospital well. I've worked for the network that operates it for 6 years, though I'm based at a different facility. I knew where to park, I knew which entrance to use, I knew not to waste time at the main desk and to go directly to the emergency department check-in. I moved through the building with the automatic confidence of someone operating on adrenaline and professional familiarity, past the familiar smell of antiseptic and recycled air, past the clusters of people in plastic chairs in the waiting area, toward the desk where a charge nurse I didn't recognize was on duty. I gave Ryan's name. She looked at her screen and said he'd been moved to a room. Not critical, monitored as a precaution, some lacerations, and a possible mild concussion but no major injuries, which made something in my chest loosen a few degrees. She gave me the room number and pointed me down the hall. I walked down the hall. The room was at the end of a corridor, the door slightly ajar, a light on inside. I pushed the door open. There was a woman sitting in the chair next to Ryan's bed. She was holding his hand. My brain did several things at once. It registered the woman, mid-30s, dark hair, dressed in what looked like clothes she'd thrown on quickly, a jacket over what might have been pajama pants, the specific disheveled urgency of someone who'd gotten a phone call and left the house without thinking about what she was wearing. It registered Ryan, pale and bandaged and hooked to a monitor, who was looking at her when I pushed the door open and whose eyes moved to me with an expression I had never in 7 years seen on his face, and which I can only describe as a man watching 2 separate worlds collide in real time. And it registered the woman's hand, holding his, in a way that was not the hand-holding of a friend or a colleague, but the specific hand-holding of someone who has held that hand many times before and has a claim to it. The woman looked up at me. I looked at her. Ryan said nothing. "I'm sorry," the woman said, in a voice that was polite and confused. Can I help you?" "I'm Natalie," I said. Ryan's wife. The sequence of events that followed is something I've replayed so many times it's worn smooth in my memory, like a stone carried in a pocket. The woman went very still. Her hand, which had been holding Ryan's, slowly released it and moved to her lap. Ryan closed his eyes, not from pain, I don't think, though he had a fairly good excuse, and then opened them again and looked at the ceiling, which is where he kept looking for most of the next 10 minutes, as if he could extract some kind of guidance from the acoustic tiles. I'm sorry, the woman said again, and her voice had changed, the politeness replaced by something that sounded, impossibly, like it matched what I was feeling. I didn't, he called me. After the accident. They let him use a phone at intake, and he called me, and I came. He called her. He had been in a car accident, and the first call he'd made was to this woman. I had been the second call, made by a nurse, not by Ryan. He had been lying in a hospital bed after a car accident, and his first instinct had been to call her. I looked at Ryan. He was still looking at the ceiling.
How long? I said.
It came out very flat, the way your voice goes when you're running on some cooler, quieter version of emotion, the kind that comes after the first wave of shock. Ryan's eyes came down from the ceiling. He looked at me, and in his face I saw the thing I'd never seen before. Not guilt exactly, not the performative shame of someone trying to manage how bad they look, but something rawer than that. Something that looked like a person who has just run out of room to hide. Natalie, he said. How long, Ryan? He looked at the woman. The woman was looking at her lap. 14 months, he said. 14 months. Over a year. I stood in the doorway of a hospital room and did the arithmetic involuntarily, the way you do when a number lands on you like that, counting back through the months that now needed to be reinterpreted. The work trip in April with the sunburned nose and the pretentious candle. The overnight client meetings. The slightly private phone. 14 months of a parallel life, assembled in the gaps of ours, and I had been burning his alibi candle in the bathroom and thinking it smelled nice. The woman stood up from the chair. She was about my height, which was an irrelevant detail I noticed anyway. She had the slightly wrecked look of someone who'd been crying before she arrived and had gotten herself under control on the drive over and was now having to hold that control under conditions she had not expected. She picked up a bag from the floor beside the chair. I should go, she said quietly, to no one in particular. Wait, I said. She stopped. She looked at me with an expression that was hard to read, braced, I think, for anger, for a scene, for the kind of confrontation that a hospital room at 11:30 at night between two women and a man in a bed might logically produce. What's your name? I said.
A pause. Claire, she said.
How long have you known he was married? Another pause. Longer. She looked at Ryan, and something in the look told me what the answer was before she said it.
The whole time, she said.
I've known the whole time. I nodded. I don't know why I nodded. It wasn't agreement, it was just my body needing to do something while my brain processed the answer. She left. I listened to her footsteps down the corridor, and then I stepped fully into the room and let the door fall shut behind me, and I sat in the chair she'd been sitting in, which was still slightly warm, and I looked at my husband in his hospital bed. We stayed like that for a while without speaking. The monitor beeped with his heart rate, which seemed rude somehow. That ordinary, reliable beep telling me his heart was beating just fine when mine felt like it had been put through something industrial. Are you hurt? I said finally, because I am, apparently, constitutionally incapable of not asking. Concussion, they think. Some stitches. He gestured vaguely at his shoulder, where I could see bandaging under the hospital gown. The other car ran a red light. It wasn't my fault. The accident. Okay, I said. Natalie. Don't, I said. Not tonight. You have a concussion and I can't do this tonight. He nodded. He looked so diminished in the bed, smaller than he looked in daily life, and I noticed that I felt something that was not quite pity and not quite protectiveness, but was adjacent to both, a reflex of care that 7 years had built in me and that apparently could not be switched off by 90 seconds of revelation. I hated that I felt it. I also understood it. Both things were true. I stayed until the attending came in to update me on his condition. Mild concussion, 2 lacerations that had been stitched, a bruised rib, no internal bleeding, observation overnight as a precaution, and discharge in the morning if everything looked stable. The attending spoke to me with the brisk compassion of someone who has delivered this particular genre of update hundreds of times, and I listened and asked the appropriate questions with the professional calm of someone who works in healthcare administration and knows how to perform composure in a hospital setting, and then he left and I stood up. I'm going to go home,
I said.
They'll discharge you in the morning. You can call someone.
Ryan looked at me.
Natalie. Good night, Ryan. I walked back down the corridor the way I'd come. Past the nurse's station, past the waiting area, through the antiseptic air, and out the emergency entrance into the August night, which was still warm in that thick late summer way, and I sat on a concrete bench outside the entrance that was probably not meant for sitting and was definitely meant for people waiting for rides, and I looked at the parking lot and breathed. A man came out after a few minutes and lit a cigarette a polite distance away, and I was aware of him the way you're aware of other people when your life has just dramatically restructured itself. At a remove, like you're watching everything through a layer of something transparent. He smoked his cigarette.
I sat on my bench.
The city made its ordinary nighttime sounds around us. I drove home. I called my sister from the car, which I probably shouldn't have done, but Maya is the person I call when the world has gone sideways, and she answered on the third ring with the alert. What's wrong? Of someone who has answered my calls enough times to know from the hour that something is wrong. I told her the version I had at the time. The accident, the room, the woman with his hand, the 14 months. Maya listened without interrupting, which is unusual for her, and when I finished there was a silence that I understood as her deciding what to say. Where are you right now? She said. Driving home. Are you okay to drive? I'm okay. You don't sound okay. I know. I'm okay. Do you want me to come over? Not tonight. I just needed to say it to someone. To make it real. It's real, she said gently. I'm so sorry, Nats. 14 months, Maya. I know. He called her first. A pause. I know. I got home. I showered. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I looked at Ryan's side of the bed, at the specific dent in his pillow, at the book on his nightstand that I now wondered if he'd actually been reading or if it was a prop in the set of our normal life. I did not cry, which surprised me. I felt scraped out and very quiet, and I thought I should probably sleep even though I knew I wouldn't, and I lay down with the lights off and looked at the ceiling the way Ryan had looked at the ceiling from his hospital bed, and I wondered what he'd been looking for up there and whether he'd found it.
I didn't sleep for a long time.
And in the hours of not sleeping, I did what you do when your brain won't stop. I went backwards. Through the 14 months, through the markers I could now identify in retrospect, through the work trips and the late nights and the private phone and the April weekend with the pretentious candle. I rebuilt the timeline with the new information slotted in, and I watched the familiar past rearrange itself into something unrecognizable. Here is where I have to tell you about the twist. Not the hospital room. I know that felt like the twist, but it wasn't the twist I'm talking about. The hospital room was just where the story appeared. The twist is what I found out 3 weeks later in a coffee shop from Claire. I know what you're thinking. I thought the same thing when she texted me. I'd given her my number in the hospital. I don't fully know why. Some impulse toward information, toward having a line to whatever truth she might possess. And she hadn't used it for 3 weeks, and then one morning I got a text that said, I think there are things you should know.
Can we meet?
My first instinct was no. My second was also no. My third instinct was the one that remembered the way she'd said, I've known the whole time, with the specific flatness of someone who's been carrying something that has gotten very heavy. And I thought, whatever she wants to tell me, I need to hear it. Not for Ryan. For myself. We met at a coffee shop on the west side, far enough from anywhere either of us typically went to be safely anonymous. I got there first, and I sat with my coffee, and I watched her come through the door, and I thought, involuntarily, that she looked tired in a way that had probably started before that hospital room and hadn't stopped since. She sat down across from me. She bought her own coffee at the counter, which I noticed as a small act of self-sufficiency, a refusal to walk in and ask anything of me, even something as trivial as a cup of coffee. Thank you for coming, she said. You said there were things I should know, I said. So tell me. She wrapped both hands around her cup and she looked at me, and in her face I saw the same quality I'd seen in the hospital, braced, but not for anger. Braced for having to say something difficult, which is different. I need to tell you something about the accident first, she said. About what happened that night before he called me. I waited. Ryan didn't call me because I was his first thought, she said. He called me because he panicked. Not about the accident. She paused. About what was in the car. The coffee shop was doing its ordinary coffee shop business around us. Someone was steaming milk. A man nearby was having a work call and using the kind of corporate language that belongs exclusively to people who believe everyone within earshot is impressed by it. An ordinary Tuesday morning. What was in the car? I repeated. Claire looked at her hands. Ryan has been struggling with a gambling problem for a long time. I don't know exactly when it started, he says before me, and I believe him. He owes money.
Not a small amount.
He's been managing it or trying to, but the night of the accident, he had a significant amount of cash in the car. Money he'd withdrawn from an account I didn't know about. He was going somewhere to settle a debt. That's why he was out. It wasn't a client dinner. I sat very still. He called me because he needed someone to get the cash out of the car before the police inventoried his belongings, she said. That's why I was the first call. Not because he loves me more. Because he needed someone to do something, and I was the person he trusted to do it without asking too many questions. She said this without any softness. Just plainly, the way you say something you've been rehearsing that you've decided to say honestly regardless of how it lands.
He used you, I said.
She gave a short, humorless sound that wasn't quite a laugh.
Yes.
And I went. I moved the money before the police came, and then I went to his room, and I sat with him, and I told myself it was because I cared about him. But mostly, I think I just didn't want to admit what I'd been used for. She looked up at me. He told me you two were separated. From the beginning. That's what he said. Separated. Working things out, but basically over. Not legally. Not yet, but effectively. I looked at her. I know how that sounds, she said. I know everyone says that. I know. I didn't know he was really married is the oldest line in the book. But I want to be clear about something. I'm not telling you this because it excuses what I did. I'm telling you because when I found out when I walked into that room and you said you were his wife, and I saw your face, I realized that I had been lied to in the same way you'd been lied to. Different lies. The same liar. She slid a piece of paper across the table.
It was a printout.
A bank statement. From an account I'd never seen before in Ryan's name, with a balance that I looked at and felt the blood drain from my face. He has at least 3 accounts you don't know about, she said. I only know about this one because he asked me to make a deposit once when he couldn't get to the bank. I copied the statement because I don't know what I thought. I thought I might need it someday. I didn't think it would be for this reason. The number on the statement was not a small number. It was the kind of number that has implications for mortgage payments, for savings, for the practical architecture of a shared financial life that I had believed I understood. I looked at the statement for a long time. My coffee was going cold. Somewhere behind me, the man with the work call was using the word synergy, which in any other moment would have annoyed me. How much does he owe? I said. I don't know exactly. More than I know about.
She paused.
I ended it. When I got home from the hospital that night, I called him and I ended it. I'm not telling you this I don't want anything from you. I don't need forgiveness. I don't need you to feel sorry for me. I just thought you deserved to know what you're actually dealing with. Because I don't think the affair is the worst thing he's been hiding. She stood up. She picked up her bag and her coffee cup, and she looked at me with an expression I haven't been able to fully categorize in the months since, something that contained regret and exhaustion and, I think, a kind of angry solidarity, the specific solidarity of 2 people who have both been administered the same lie by the same person. I'm sorry, she said, for my part in it. Genuinely. She left. I sat in the coffee shop for a long time after she was gone. The man with the work call wrapped up and left. The milk steamer went through its cycles. A mother came in with a toddler who was extremely enthusiastic about the pastry case, and I watched them for a while without really seeing them. Here is what I've spent the most time sitting with in the months since that coffee shop. Claire walked in that night thinking Ryan was in the process of leaving his wife. She had been told for 14 months that I was a chapter that was ending. She had been held in place with a story about a marriage that was already over, a separation that just hadn't been made formal yet. She had organized her feelings around the information she'd been given, and the information had been fabricated. And so there were 3 people in that hospital room, Ryan in the bed, me in the doorway, Claire in the chair, and 2 of us were operating on false premises. 2 of us had loved someone who had constructed a different fiction for each of us. carefully calibrated to what each person needed to hear in order to stay. I did not anticipate feeling anything like sympathy for Claire. I had every right not to. But I found, in the weeks after the coffee shop, that what I felt toward her was complicated in a way that simple anger would have been easier than. She had participated in something that hurt me enormously. She had also been lied to, and the lie had been sophisticated and sustained, and when the moment came to choose between protecting Ryan's secret and telling me the truth, she'd chosen to tell me the truth. She didn't have to do that. Whatever her reasons, she chose it. Ryan, I should tell you, handled the unraveling with the spectacular incompetence of a man who has been caught not once, but twice in the same week. He was discharged from the hospital the morning after the accident and stayed at a hotel because I had changed the locks, not in a dramatic I'm changing the locks moment, but practically because I work adjacent to healthcare and I understand that shock does not immunize you from good decisions. And one of the good decisions available to me was not spending the night in a house that the man who had just revealed himself could walk into. He called me several times. I answered once, long enough to tell him that I knew about the accounts and that I had retained a lawyer, and then I hung up. The lawyer was my friend Keisha's idea. Keisha is an attorney, not a divorce attorney, but she knew who to call, and she called them, and I had a consultation within 48 hours of the coffee shop meeting. What I learned in that consultation confirmed and expanded on what Claire had shown me. Ryan had been hiding financial activity for at least 3 years, not all of it gambling related, but all of it hidden. The picture that emerged was of a man who had been building a shadow life not just romantically but financially, sustaining it through careful management of what I knew and what I saw, and who had gotten away with it for so long that I think he'd stopped believing it would ever end. It ended. I won't go through the legal details, partly because they're still partially ongoing and partly because they're not the most important part of the story, though they are certainly the most practically consequential. I'll say that Ryan's financial situation was significantly worse than the one bank statement Claire had shown me suggested, and that the process of untangling what was shared and what was hidden has been among the least enjoyable experiences of my adult life, and that I have a very good lawyer who's been worth every cent, and that I am grateful every single day that we never had children. We never had children. I want to say that plainly, because I think sometimes people read these posts and wonder, and I don't want anyone to be worrying about that piece of it on my behalf. We had talked about it, had always assumed it was in the future, had never arrived at the future in question because the present had always seemed like enough. I am now incandescently grateful for the particular rhythm of our lives that kept the future just a little bit ahead of us, always something to get to rather than something we'd arrived at. It's been 4 months since the accident. 3.5 since the coffee shop. Ryan and I are in the process of divorce, which is a sentence I practice saying out loud to myself in the car a few times, the way you practice other things you need to get used to, until it stopped feeling like swallowing something sideways and started feeling like a fact. It's a fact. We are in the process of divorce. I've thought about what kind of person I am now after this, because I think you inevitably come out of something like this different than you went in, and the question is different how. I've thought about the warning signs I missed, and the ones I saw and talked myself out of. I've thought about what it means to love someone for 7 years and not know them, and whether that's a failure of perception, or whether some people are simply constructed to be undetectable, to present a version of themselves that is designed to pass inspection. I've thought about the candle, which I finally threw out last week, and whether I feel anything about that, and I think what I feel is mostly just relief that the bathroom shelf has space for something else. I've also thought about Claire, more than I expected to. Not with warmth, exactly, that would be a generous word for something more neutral. With recognition, maybe. She made choices I wouldn't have made, but the foundation of those choices was a lie she'd been told, and when she had something I needed to know, she told me. That matters to me. I'm not sure what to do with it mattering to me, but it does. My sister Maya, who has been unfailingly present throughout all of this in the way that the best people are unfailingly present, said something to me last month that I keep coming back to. We were sitting on her back porch on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of late summer afternoon that feels like the last exam before autumn arrives, and I was in the middle of describing some detail of the legal proceedings and I trailed off, and she looked at me and said, "You know what I keep thinking about?"
What?
I said. That he called her first, she said. And even then it wasn't because she was first. It was because she was useful. That's the part that keeps getting me.
I thought about that.
about the hierarchy of that phone call. Not love, not loyalty, but utility. He had been